vast and global. I mean, space is vast and exploration is vast and research is vast. Like that, the global opportunities are also vast. And in this presentation, I try to touch some of the global opportunities and give you what are the knowledge I had to collected till now that actually helped me through my career, and hopefully that will help you in your career as well, if you are or when you are willing to explore space. Starting with, I wanted to say, I mean, how it all started and why I got here and how I got here. So if you say my journey to planetary research, I'm actually born in a very small town village in Tamil Nadu. It's a southern village in Tamil Nadu. And we didn't have much exposure back then. If you ask 8 or 9-year-old of me, thinking that where will you be in the future, what will be in the future, I honestly didn't know even the where part of it. But for had to prepare the talk, I was trying to put, okay, let's try to put some of the locations wherever we did our education, wherever we traveled to give for scientific talks and stuff. And put in the map, it felt like, wow, we have done. I mean, the old me would have never thought I this much in the quest for planetary research. And how it started, early education. I am a 90s kid. I mean, in 90s, we didn't have much in the syllabus like what we have now. For example, if you talk to a 10th standard student nowadays, they study economics in their syllabus. Back then, we didn't have economics, and obviously we didn't have any space exploration and research stuffs in our syllabus. So usually when children get inculcated with new ideas is when they're exposed to it. We were in the age where internet was born and developing and giving revolutionary impact on culture and technology. But then that internet did not reach in nooks and corners of the world, especially not in nooks and corners of India, of course, maybe in the West, but not in India. Means our exposure to various stuffs are limited to newspaper and all those stuff. And of course, our books and syllabus. So our books, if they do not expose us to a variety of things, back then we do not really know about many things, what's happening around the world. During those times, my first inspiration came. I was doing my 7th standard, and my chemistry teacher came to my class. It was the first class in that morning. I very clearly remember that morning. So he came and he said, "Hey, did you listen to the news? Our Indian astronaut, she was a woman astronaut called Kalpana Chawla. She died today in the Columbia disaster." Now I'm saying all this, but that time it was all new for me. Oh, space shuttle, astronaut, and everything. We knew Rakesh Sharma was the first astronaut, but then we only knew it as a GK question. We never thought about going to space and all those things. At least I did not. It did not inculcate that thought to that 7th standard girl at that time until this moment. So he was telling what was the shuttle, how the disaster happened, what happened. It all was so fascinating. And at the end of his explanation, he asked, "Okay, now who in the class wants to become an astronaut?" I looked around and I saw nobody was putting their hands up. Oh, I thought, okay, this is an opportunity to get some claps. I put my hands up and there were claps. But that was the first time I ever said, okay, I want to become an astronaut. Around the same month, there was this national astronomy quiz competition. So me and my friend, we used to represent school for various quiz competitions in state and in the district. This was another quiz competition, and we set to go. But it was about astronomy. Obviously, we didn't know anything about astronomy. So my dad went to Eagle Bookstore in Tirunelveli and got a very small book explaining different planets in the solar system. I read from front to back, and I thought, okay, I know all about astronomy. I went to the preliminary to attend the exam, and I hardly knew any answer for the entire question paper. It was all about physics and astrophysics and asking different questions. It was so fascinating. I wanted to know the answer, but I just do not know from where to start. I didn't even know the math behind it. And failing was I was not very used to failing back then. I craved to be first in the academics in whatever I do. So I could not really handle that kind of rejection that I couldn't answer even 4 questions in a question paper of more than like 20, 30 questions. That inculcated the first thing in me that, oh, I should know this subject. I want to learn more about this subject, which actually made me fail. But then that was inspiration, but I couldn't go more outside because it's about the place where I live. It was a village, and there are only limited opportunities that I can actually go for. Then the first groundbreaking thing happened when I actually joined my 11th and 12th in Velama International School. I could go there only because of my 10th marks and because of the scholarship what I got. Otherwise, I could never imagine going to such schools. So the school is so different from the school what I got before. The earlier school gave me very good education, but this school gave me more than education. It gave me facilities and extracurricular things that I could actually put my hands on. So the school is open to all the laboratories and to the libraries for any student any time of the day. And it's a residential school, so we do not go outside. We are in the school all the time. Means we have open access to everything, and that changed a lot. So most of the time I used to either spend in the computer lab or I go to the library and read any book if it is written space or astronomy or something related to it. Honestly, or those times I don't understand much of it or any of it. But then I just could not stop reading. More and more I read, I was getting so fascinated. I wanted to do something. I wanted to learn something. I don't even know the word career at that time. I wanted to do something in space stuff. And I always thought aerospace engineering is the key to do space stuff because it has space in it, and Kalpana Chawla was an aerospace engineer. But the school knows about my passion and they wanted to really help. So instead of giving their opinion, they actually booked an appointment to career counseling in Meena Bakam, who is, it's called Technocrust. And I took my dad to them and I tried to tell them what I wanted to do. Honestly, at that time, I myself didn't understand what I really wanted to do. But that person understood. I didn't realize at that time. I realized in very later part of my life. But then he understood and then he said, okay, there is this course called geoinformatics in CEG. If you take this course, you can actually shift your career to planetary science in the future. I was not very convinced by that because geoinformatics, there are not even space in it. How it can even take me to space? But then I took that advice. I took the course. So geoinformatics. So I ended up in CEG, College of Engineering, Gindi, and took the geoinformatics course, not very sure if that's what really I wanted to do. The very next month I joined the college. I went to the Birla Planetarium just behind our college and told them that I'm so passionate in all these things. I want to do something to their director. And he said about the Tamil Nadu Astronomical Association association, which was kind of organized and did in the Birla Planetarium. And I became a lifetime member and started being in a community where people actually love space. So that was the first time the network kind of a little bit got widened because until that moment I was alone. I was alone trying to find what I want to do. But going there are more people like me who are also passionate about space, and I learned a lot from them. That association with the Chan Astro Club and inspiration from my senior Aishwarya Raman, I happened to found the Astronomy and Planetary Science Club of CEG to unite CEGians who are passionate in space and planets in the college. And in Kurukshetra 2012, you all know it is an inter-college Technofest of CEG, and we happened to have our first workshop in the night, astrophotography workshop, where one of the member of TANASTRO member taught us how to do astrophotography. And these were all about space, but then I felt so disconnected from my actual department because in actual department, we were learning a lot about Earth, but what we were learning? Geoinformatics, I don't know how many, even I didn't know what geoinformatics until I joined the course because everybody talks about ECE, EEE, mechanical, so many departments, but nobody says, hey, take geoinformatics. So what is geoinformatics? In case you didn't know, I hope this helps. Geoinformatics is converting raw thematic data to geospatial information. I know it may just look nonsense to you, what I'm talking. What is it? So if you take Earth, and if you try to understand the land, the sea, and the ocean, and the atmosphere, to understand all those things, we have to do lots of surveying. That surveying can happen in the land, or in the ocean, or in the air, or from the space. Another major aspect of geoinformatics nowadays is remote sensing. Though a lot happen in the field, I mean, we also do lots of field stuffs, but one of the major and the most common, most advanced thing happening now is in the space. So what we do, we go to the space, image the Earth for different case studies, to study its climate, to study its vegetation, the water, the land and atmosphere, the ozone layer, the forest space, and all those things. But we're only taking data. But data, we know, raw data gives us nothing. Unless we convert data into information, all the data is just some numbers that don't say as much. So geoinformatics train us to understand how satellite works, how remote sensing work, how GPS works, and how all these things work, how we can combine all this information together and create maps and create information that is actually easily readable to wiser decisions for the respective field. And that's what we do. So it's a combination of science and engineering, and it's a very, very interesting field, and it's a very wide field that you can actually do lots of stuff. But then in the college we were learning a lot about the earth. We were talking earth, vegetation, the water, and so many things. But then I enjoy the subjects, but then I was not sad, because that's not what really I want. I love earth, but I wanted to do something outer. I wanted to do something away from earth, which I was not getting from the department, which made me not so happy about it. But if I would have simply did a Google search on geoinformatics planetary science, I would have really learned so much. Oh my God, there's so many things out there. But then old me, who was very new to internet and all those things, though I go to internet to connect with people, to find a solution if I have a problem in installing a software, and so I never thought internet to actually search for opportunities. It just didn't strike me until my internship in the 3rd year of BE. So at that time, the BE opportunity led me to the first exposure of using geoinformatics skills in planetary science. So I got this internship opportunity called DART-WISE. DART-WISE is working internship for science and engineering funded by DART for Indian students to work in Germany for 2 months as an internship. It's a summer internship. And our travel and the stay in the Germany are all funded by DART. So when we got this opportunity, when we got to apply for this opportunity, I thought, okay, if I'm going to Germany, I want to do it in planetary science. At that time, I didn't even think geoinformatics and planetary. I only thought, okay, I want to do something in planetary only. Or at that time, we used to say space stuff only. So I was looking for opportunities in Germany where I can do internship, and I came across this institution. First time I ever heard is German Aerospace Center, DLR. German Aerospace Center is nothing but like German's ISRO. Like India, we have ISRO is Germany Space Center, which is German Aerospace Center, and DLR in German, which is Deutsches Luft- und Raumfahrt. And over there, I asked my host, Rolf Yaman, and asking him, oh, I'm a student from India and very much passionate. Shall I come work for you? And one evening, I got a reply saying yes. And he said, yeah, I can actually go and work, which was such a joyous moment at that time. And I applied for the scholarship with a host letter, got the scholarship, and I went there. I went there, and that's where everything changed. So the first day, I thought, okay, once we go there, we have some 1 week to enjoy Berlin, and then we will slowly start to work. Like most of the times, it happened at that time over here. But I went there, they gave me a pen drive with full of data. They said, okay, you can use ArcGIS to map all these things. They knew all those skills because they have my CV, they know what I know, and they thought I would be best suited for this job. So I got this data, a folder full of Martian images and Martian surface. It was so spectacular to see such a beautiful surface, and those images were taken by high-resolution stereo camera of Mars Express. Mars Express is an ESA mission, and HRSC was actually built at DLR. So the data is owned by DLR. And the first project is to map the surface features. Like back then in India, I used to map the Earth for land use and water use. Here we are mapping Mars for its surface. And they asked me to find the age of the surface. I was like, how can you find the age of the surface? They said, okay, just by mapping the craters and its crater size frequency distribution, we can actually know age of any planetary surface for which we know the curves of crater size frequency distribution. That was also fascinating. That was something, a very new knowledge I learned over there. But that's the first time I actually used the skills, what I learned in geoinformatics, and applied to a different planet. That opened the door. Okay, then there are so many planets, so much of data, means the old training what we got as a BE, we can actually apply to the space science. That's the same thing what that career counselor long ago. Huge thanks to him. So I got that knowledge, came back to India. Then I came into my 4th year, and my senior in the college told me, hey, look out for this opportunity called Planix Workshop during this month. So it happened in the month of January. During this month, and apply for that workshop. At the end of the workshop, they'll take an interview and select people for project associateship. In the advertisement, they never mentioned that there is going to be an interview and we can actually apply for a position there. This is why you need to have network. If you are passionate about something, want to do something about something, talk to people, just even if you do not know what to talk to people, expressing that you are passionate to do these things. Because when you keep expressing them, they know they will find a way for you for that to happen. And that's what our senior Aishwarya Raman did for me. So I, like she said, the Planet Workshop advertisement came. I applied for that. Out of people applied, 35 students were selected, and we during the workshop we did a project called wireless sensor networks for asteroid surface exploration. That was also very interesting, trying to understand asteroid vista and how we can use all these WSNs and to extract information from the surface. So it's very, very interesting project. It's a team project. And at the end of the workshop, there was an interview. We all gave the interview, and 5 of them were selected, and I was one of them. I went as a project assistant. I was there for 3 years, and that's where the first research, independent research, I could do in planetary science field. And that was also the time where we had the Chandrayaan-1 data. So Chandrayaan-1 is our first interplanetary, first lunar mission, not interplanetary, sorry, first lunar mission. And we were first time going to the moon, carrying amazing instruments and different instruments that were never flown to moon before. For example, one is the first hyperspectral imager in the visible infrared ever flown to moon, was carried by ISRO, and it brought so many discoveries, including finding different minerals like spinel to water on the moon. This everybody knew. Chandrayaan-1 discovered water on the moon, and that is this instrument. So my first project was to, hey Indu, so we have this data, and you have to work on young basalts on the moon. And this data is moon mineralogy mapper and young basalts of the moon. When they say, I blinked. Okay, oh, young basalts of the moon. Young I understand, moon I understand, but basalts I don't understand. Moon mineralogy mapper, okay, what is it? So moon mineralogy mapper is a hyperspectral imager. So if you take any camera image, it's either a 3-band image or a 4-band image. What does it say? It combines the information in red, green, and blue band, combines it together to give a more colorful picture. But what if we combine multiple bands in a selected electromagnetic range? We know sun gives out all range of electromagnetic radiation, and it interacts with any matter it comes into its path. And that includes Earth surface and moon surface and any planetary surface. So moon surface is open. I mean, it's just exposed to the sun, and sunlight falls on it, and it reflects, catches, and emits the radiation that's coming out of the space. So if you have a detector that actually measures the reflected light, for in this case reflected light at various different channels, and combine together to see what the spectral shape gives us, that tells us what the lunar surface is made up of. How do we know? For example, if there is a cat in the picture, and if you want to look for the cat in the picture, you should know how the cat looks like. It's the same principle. So to know what mineral what we have on the moon, we have to know how the mineral actually looks like in the laboratory. So in the left here, you see the different spectral patterns of different minerals, the common lunar minerals, and here you see all the bands which will actually give the spectral shape for each pixel in this image. So by knowing these different spectral patterns, we can actually extract the very colorful image for any surface of the moon. So this was a very interesting learning for me. The image analysis part was not very new for me because I was doing it in BE as a course, but then the mineralogy part was very different. The geology part was very different because we didn't have like pure geology and mineralogy course. So there was a lot of self-learning. My friends and colleagues said, especially my dearest friend Jinya Sikdar, she used to teach geology every night after dinner just for me. And by taking all this help, I could actually try to do real science on moon. In 1.5 years or so, I could finally bring out the paper studying mineralogy of young lunar basalts. So what are basalts? I forgot to tell you. So basalts is a type of rock. Most of you here may know. At that time, I didn't know. Okay, it's a rock which actually formed during the volcanic when volcanism happened, because basalts have lots of it contains heavier metals. Usually heavier metals are lower in the or buried more deeper in the earth, because heavy metal sinks, so it sinks deeper in the earth. So if you find heavy metals on the surface, so something should bring out that metal to the surface, and that will be volcanism. So volcanism is the most powerful natural digger that can go so deep. So our mining and driller cannot go more than few kilometers nowadays, but this volcanism material sometimes come from the depth of like 200, 300 kilometers and more. This is amazing. It's a pure natural digger. So by understanding the surface lunar minerals belonging to volcanic events, we can actually study what lunar interior is made up of, lunar moon interior is made up of. So this was all very fascinating, and I learned a lot during this project. And that was also the same time where India is getting prepared for the Mars orbiter mission. So that's one of the best thing doing planetary science in India, because when you go outside, it is not so easy to shift from a planet body to planet body, because there are already so much of data, and there are already so much of missions in one planet. If you take moon, they have 2 or 3 missions, there is so much of data that people have to concentrate. But when we come to India, India is like growing so fast, especially it's going so fast when it comes to planetary science. We are going to new targets each and every time in a very shorter time span, actually. So we were going to moon, and then we're suddenly going to Mars. So every planetary science people and the planetary science of people working in India are it's a very, very small community. There are not lots of people, and they had to suddenly shift to moon to understand suddenly shift to Mars to understand what Mars is made up of, what we can do, how we can squeeze science out of it. So my advisor told me, okay, Indu, now next project you have to do work on Mars. I was like, okay, but Mars is very different body than moon. In moon, we do not have atmosphere, we do not have rain, there are no clouds. So all the minerals, whichever came to the surface, it just stayed like that. There was nothing eroding them. But Mars was not like that. Mars has an atmosphere, which is again doing some erosion over there, and it also had water in the past, means it had sedimentary deposits. It was also altered by aqueous minerals. When you see sedimentary minerals and aqueous minerals, there are it's a huge range of minerals that I had to learn, because I was an engineer, was not a science person as a base. It was a huge learning, and again, my friends helped a lot, and self-learning. I used to read lots of books, lots of papers, lots of things to really equip myself to really do science over there. But back then we did not have MOM data, so I went with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is a NASA mission, and it carried a spectrometer called the Compact Reconnaissance Imaging Spectrometer for Mars. It's a similar spectrometer for Moon, but it is for Mars. It's again the visible infrared spectral region, but the spatial resolution of this data is like average of 20 meters per pixel. Imagine mapping 20-meter hyperspectral imaging for Mars, like having all these different channels for 20-meter scale. Imagine how big the Mars is. If you keep mapping 20 meter, that's a explode that you cannot even, the satellite will not have that much memory, even how long it will take to download all the data. So usually what the XRISM, so MRO still operates, XRISM still takes images, but they always go for the targeted part. So they keep increasing the number of targets on the Mars, but then it is still not it doesn't have a global coverage for Mars. But we do have global coverage for different instruments, which have coarser resolution, but then they have lots of images. So what we did, okay, in order to, and at that time we knew the spatial resolution of MOM will not be as good as well. So we thought, okay, what if we go and see the surface by taking the photogeologic information, means there is a photo of a geology, and what if we understand how different actual existing minerals look like in those photos, and if we characterize them into different type of minerals relating to different type of polygons, then even if we do not have XRISM data, even if we do not have any mineral information for that surface, can we say about the mineralogy of the surface? It was a very interesting learning for me. I actually also wrote the paper, sent it, now it is under revision, and it was very, very interesting to learn about Mars and so on. Because of these things, because of Moon and because of Mars, I knew I wanted to do masters, because to set a career in planetary science, you need to have a PhD, especially in the research. Research means PhD, you need to have a PhD. For PhD, our next step is masters. So though I applied all over the world, I finally choose masters in planetary science at UCL, mainly because I could get funding for that. So I applied for 2 major fundings called Commonwealth and Chevening scholarship to do masters in UK. It's a fully funded scholarship, and our family was not equipped at that time to pay a lot to do studies abroad. So I had to really rely on scholarships, and that's why I chose places where I could go with full scholarship. And thankfully, fortunately, whatever it is, I actually got both the scholarships, Commonwealth and Chevening, but I chose Commonwealth because the results of Commonwealth came first, and I told yes. And and I'm very happy. The both are very prestigious scholarship. Take one of them, doesn't matter really. It pays the same. It's all the same. So I went to UCL in Masters in Planetary Science. UCL, if you do not know, that's where our Mahatma Gandhi actually did law. It's a very, very impressive college. It was the first foreign exposure where I actually did education. It was a huge learning. And under UCL, there were like lots of core modules that I could choose from, because I already was I was studying moon, I was doing spectroscopy, meteorology, volcanism, and all those things. And that helped me to choose what real courses that I would really want to do. But then UCL offers varieties of courses. The green things, what we mark here, is a courses what actually I took. But then there are other courses that you can always choose from. So because I was studying planetary, the volcanism, which is planetary interior and all this stuff, so I took deep earth and planetary modeling, earth and planetary materials, planetary atmospheres, melting and volcanism, astronomical spectroscopy, and earth and planetary system science. Yesterday, when I was trying to prepare this PPT, when I was trying to see what courses UCL have, when I studied in 2015, there are not many courses actually listed here. There were no exploration planetary interiors, there were no advanced topics in planetary science, volcanism, solar system, and environmental isotopes. So these are new courses. Imagine in 4 or 5 year spans, the planetary field itself is exploding so much that you need varieties of expertise, varieties of courses to be trained on. And this is the right time to do planetary exploration in a very interdisciplinary way. So like I told you, when I was doing my research in PRL, I had to do lots of self-learning. But now taking all these courses gave me a strong basic, a very structured module basic of what I knew earlier, and I learned a lot of what I actually never knew before. And all these different opportunities gave me a lead to do my PhD in planetary science at DLR. Remember I told you I did my intern at DLR German Space Center? I actually came back to the same institute to do my PhD, but with a different group called Planetary Spectroscopy Laboratory Group. When I read the advertisement, I was like, wow, Planetary Spectroscopy Laboratory, and they were doing spectroscopy. It was the project proposal was the same what I was doing for the moon, but then it was for Mercury. So I thought I would best fit to the question. I wrote to my advisor. I mean, now he's my advisor back then, and he said, yeah. And then I came here. So, but what was my PhD on? This I never thought again I will be participating ever in my future. So I was given a project to work with a spectrometer, which is flying with Bepi-Colombo. So Bepi-Colombo is a second orbiter to Mercury. The first orbiter was by NASA called the Messenger mission. And it is a very highly elliptical orbit mission. If you ask me why, if I have some time, the answer from you will be because Mercury is too close to Sun. It is too hot. If you send a space mission there, it is too hot to survive there. So they take such an elliptical orbit. You only go short time closer to the Mercury, means closer to the Sun, and then you go back. You just go back so much away that you do not get affected by the solar flares and solar radiations and stuff. That was launched in like all happened 2011 to 2015. But now it's 2018-19, and by then Bepi-Colombo was already doing lots of research and advancement in technology to survive more closer to the Sun and not also get destroyed. So there were lots of inventing thermal insulating materials across the Bepi-Colombo, and the way the solar panels arranged were all optimized to actually withstand solar radiation. And I forgot to mention, so Bepi-Colombo itself is a twin satellite mission. It has two satellites, one contributed by ESA called Mercury Planetary Orbiter, and the other contributed by JAXA called Mercury Magnetospheric Orbiter. And the Mercury Magnetospheric Orbiter is a very small, a circular body, and the whole body is surrounded by solar planets. So it keeps circles, like the interstellar one. It keeps circles so that the solar panels are not directly exposed to the Sun for the long time. You can actually read how Bepi-Colombo is actually planned. Such an interesting story, and you will enjoy it. So Bepi-Colombo was actually launched on 2018 October. By the time I was doing my second year of PhD, and I was actually in the Mission Control Center in ESA when Bepi-Colombo was launched. I've never had this experience before, sitting in the mission control, sitting with all the scientists and engineers. That heartbeat and that tension, that was amazing. That was really, really amazing. And what was a spectrometer? This spectrometer is a MERCURY itself is a dual instrument, means that one instrument has a radiometer and a spectrometer, but the spectrometer is in different spectral range, the thermal infrared spectral range. So it is the first spectrometer which will fly to Mercury, will map the Mercury in the spectral range, and will also map the Mercury surface temperature both daytime and nighttime. So that is one of the most unique part of this instrument. It is lightweight. It's only 3.1 kg. If you know more about spectrometers and thermal imaging spectrometers, one of the major drawback is we need lots of cooling, because you have a word thermal there. Thermal is hot. So spectrometer gets hot. So you need to cool. So that itself really restricts thermal infrared spectrometers to fly into space. But this is a 3.1 new technology, microbolometer technology, which miniaturized the thermal imaging spectrometer, and there we have it. But I forgot to tell you, Baby Colombo launched in October 2018, but it will reach Mercury only in 2025. Means we still have like 5 more years to go, or 6 more years to go, because we'll reach only in like early 2026. It means I do not have data. So I have a PhD to work on this instrument, the science of this instrument, but I do not have data. So what to do? That literally, some people ask me, okay, that's a disadvantage, but I said that was my biggest advantage ever. If I did have the data, I will only work with the data. Because I did not have the data, it opened the opportunities to learn various other spectroscopic techniques, which I never in my dreams I thought I will learn. So first is very common thing, which I was doing earlier, is taking the orbital data of Messenger mission, of NASA mission, and take the spectrometer on board NASA mission, and try to understand what the Mercury surface meteorology using that instrument. So that was something common, which was doing for Moon and Mars, and that's okay. The next thing is telescope observations. First time, I always want to go to Hawaii, but I never thought I will, anytime in my life I will go to Hawaii for telescope observations. But this opportunity really gave me that. I went to Hawaii and went to the NASA IRTF is NASA Infrared Telescope Facility. Telescope, and then when they observed Mercury, tried to take spectral information of the Mercury and doing some analysis there. It was amazing. I learned so much about astronomy and pointing, and at first everything was new, but now it's amazing. And one of the very unique opportunity of this PhD is the laboratory experience. Means when we work with the remote sensing data and work with telescope data and everything, we do not know how really spectral behavior differs in different viewing angles, and we always read it in theory, but having a laboratory and really working with it, analyzing is something very different. And that's where we have Planetary Spectroscopy Laboratory Facility at DLR. And I forgot to put here, but anybody here can also apply to do measurements there. So there is something called Europlanet RA infrastructure. You can write to me if you want to know. You can apply to this laboratory to take measurements, and it is funded by Europlanet. So you make use of the opportunity. In planetary spectroscopy laboratory, we can actually do reflectance to transmittance from UV to far infrared, means 0.15 to 100 micron, from minus 100 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius. Means you can do reflective spectroscopy of very cold planets or moons. And one of the very unique facility of planetary spectroscopy is this small box which is fitted to the spectrum. So these two are the spectrometers, and this small box fitted to the spectrometer. So this is the planetary emissivity chamber. So here we can do a spectra from 0.7 to 200 micron in vacuum and or nitrogen or air, but up to temperatures of 700 degrees Celsius. Means taking spectra for the very extreme surface temperature planets like Mercury and Venus. If we take Mercury, we know Mercury is so close to the sun. So in nighttime temperature is like minus 150 degrees Celsius, but its daytime temperature is, peak temperature is like 450 degrees Celsius. Having a mineral, having something under 450 degrees Celsius, it obviously will do some damage to it. And to understand how the spectral behavior, how the material behaviors, and then how it relates to the spectral behavior of the materials, we really have to understand it in the lab, and that's what it is. So we call this box as like planetary emissivity chamber, but I personally call it a solar system in the lab. So in this small box, you can actually create as many different types of surface environment of different planetary targets that you could think of. I will say something for Mercury. So for Mercury, what we do, so here is a carousel, like a stand where we keep the sample, and the sample is in heat, and we control the temperature of the sample cup by controlling amount of ampere or current what we give to this induction coil. And therefore we slowly heat the sample cup by slowly increasing the current. because Mercury day is like 176 days from day and night, and one day is like 88 days. So we have to slowly heat it. We slowly heat it, and as we heat it, the samples emit radiation, and we send that emitted radiation to the spectrometer, and it's a Fourier transform infrared spectrometer. So in simple words, it splits this emission radiation into number of channels, and it records its energy via a computer software in a simple way. So in what we get from room temperature to like 450 degrees Celsius or 500 degrees Celsius, we could get a emission spectra as it evolves with increase in temperature. That is a very unique data set, which not only will help MERTIS, but also help us to understand how mercury behaves. It is. So these are the two thermal temperature sensors sitting the sample, which help us to know what's the current temperature of the sample. And it's a gold-coated mirror, which just pushes the emission to the spectrometer. And what you see here, this image is actually taken via webcam, just fitted inside the chamber itself. So in that way, we not only do all the measurements, but we can also see how the sample behaviors with extreme temperatures. And this is one of the research which came out of that. I was studying sulfides, because sulfides was something a very new discovery, kind of say that we can take it from NASA Messenger mission. So NASA Messenger mission gives an amazing information of mercury, and also gave us so many unanswered questions or new questions that to be answered. And one of that is mercury surface can still have sulfides. Sulfides means sulfur. I mean, sulfur is a volatile. Mercury was so close to sun, we thought Mercury should be a very volatile, depleted planet. But then we understood from its surface geology that Mercury surface has volatiles, means how Mercury could even trap the volatiles. So that was all very, very, very interesting. And that's why we went to study the sulfides. And this is an example of how magnesium sulfides behave. So if you see, this is the room temperature, 100 degree, 200 degree, and 500 degrees Celsius of magnesium. Suddenly at 200.
Excuse me.
Sorry?
Yeah, just a reminder, we have 5 more minutes left before we go into the question and answer session.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, thanks. My mistake. And you can see how magnesium sulfide already behaved, just sputtering all around. And this was all me, just taking me, giving in. So all the yellow dots, what you see here is the education and training. All the violet dots it's the talks which I gave in the conference, which took me to the world to present whatever I was doing since my master's and PhD and so on. So like I said, if you set to take a research in planetary science, trust me, you will be a global researcher by default. And hereafter, all the slides now will tell you a little bit about what is happening right now, and I will concentrate more. I will only go through this because we don't have time. I'll concentrate more on one slide, which is coming now. So this is, ISRO's very ambitious Gaganyaan mission. It's a manned mission, and this is our Vyomitra, our ISRO's robot for unmanned space missions, for controlling unmanned space missions. When Apollo landed on the moon, it was a huge engineering feat. But now our engineering technology is way beyond what we had during 1960s. Now it takes it takes a very interdisciplinary science to do for the next human space flight exploration. Tomorrow, look for the Crew Dragon launch. So it is taking 2 astronauts. It's a first test for the NASA commercial crew program. So NASA is partnering with SpaceX and bringing 2 astronauts up to the space to do flight tests. And that's the next era of space exploration is happening in 2020. Now, the space is not limited to government agencies, but also to commercial agencies, which means the opportunity is going to explode beyond what we have right now. And this is our ISRO, the current missions on Chandrayaan-2, orbiting the moon, taking lots of amazing data, but also taking information of the moon, which was never viewed in different spectral range before. And we have JUICE mission of ESA going to explore the Jupiter icy moons. And we have NASA Dragonfly mission, which is going to go to the Saturn's moon Titan like a dragonfly and going to explore its surface beneath it. It's very impressive. And we have a Martian moon. We have always been to Mars, but what about the Martian moons? Flybase of moons, but not orbiters. So JAXA is planning to explore these Martian moons similarly. And we have Chang'e, the Chinese missions landing on the moon until last year, and we have lots of these amazing data. And apart from solar system planets, now we have so many missions we already had, and there are so many upcoming missions to actually explore exoplanet missions. So there are so many opportunities from instrumentations, the space materials, actual data science, and everything. And I have already shared this slide to Warkit. Please take the slide, and here you can find where you can find all the different data from different countries, in ISRO, ESA, and NASA, and how you can actually use even you can also download some of the process data, and there is this GitHub repository of USGS where they have lots of different tools that you can use it and code it for the data. Because we have so much data of different planets, it also inspires lots of commercial industries, even in data science. These are like two examples how Google and NVIDIA is interested in planetary science and exploration. So no matter you're a computer scientist, whoever you are, whatever you want to be space exploration, you have a place in space exploration research. There are no limits for space exploration. Even if you're a doctor, you can be into a research of space exploration. So I want to just talk a little more on career opportunities and planetary science. So before going there, okay, check out for this link here. So this link here, I have over the years I've documented various different types of opportunities that one could look for in master's, PhD, and postdoc. I use that document for my own purpose. So I thought from this talk I could actually share it publicly, have it. So when you say career opportunities, planetary science, like I told you, if you want to do research, so PhD nowadays is must more expected, because lots of people have PhD, and PhD gives us lots of different training that a master student do not have. So if I want to do, I will say go for PhD if you really want to do lots of research in planetary exploration and research. Even if it's instrumentation, try to take a PhD on that. And once you have a PhD, there are other opportunities, like you can, okay, postdoc is a very temporary opportunity. You have to always go beyond postdoc, but postdoc makes you to become even more independent researcher. But after postdoc, in academic side, you can always become a professor or scientist in institutions like ISRO, PRL, SAC, Space Application Center in India, and so on. You can always become a scientist in there or teach in the universities, like even our Sri Venkateshwara College. You can come here and teach planetary science, given you have department or open a new department there. And you also have few industry opportunities these days. Not so much, but you still have industry opportunities. Okay, when I say not so much, if you're an engineer, yes, obviously you have lots of opportunities. But if you're going towards something like science or data science, an actual planet researcher or space researcher, you have few opportunities, but trust me, you have opportunities. You just have to look for it. So in this PPT, I'm just going to just scroll down what that document has. So it's a very long document, going from current PhD opportunities in USA to postdoctoral fellowship, interagency fellowship, different universities. You should be aware, because all these were collected for my own purpose, so they were more focused on planetary science. But hope it will help many of you who are listening here. So Lockheed Martin, they were actually looking for deep space planetary research scientists, like I told you. Even the industries are looking for planetary scientists these days. So look for this PPT. It has all the links that will be, even the funding opportunities in Germany and different countries. Look for that. I hope it is helpful to set your career, to plan your career, what you actually want to do. Where am I? And that's it. So this is just a screenshot of the master's PhD position what we have, and you can see there are so many positions actually for fall 2020. If you want to look for masters, write to them. It's an open document. It actually contributed by US, and write to them that you are interested, and see if you could get funding. And I know some of my juniors have already did that and got the position. And for all the different opportunities I was talking, which I had, and a few of the things, I put all the links here. I hope it is helpful. So if you want to contact me for a particular college which I applied, you want some help from, contact me in LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn link here. So finally, thanks so much, Wahid and Sendil, for really considering me for this amazing season and amazing thing what Virtual Campus is doing at SVCT. And I want to personally thank Hariharan Swaminathan for his YouTube channel, Lockdown with Hari. That's where I actually gave an interview on what I did, and my college junior Shritish got inspired and contacted Sendil maybe to think that I will be best for this. I hope I contributed to you all, made you inspired to take a career in planetary science and research. I hope I see you all, or some of you at least, in future conferences. Tell me a hi if you're there. We'll be happy to catch up. Thank you.